Hello and welcome back. Today I'm going to do a beach ocean resin piece on a art palette. This isn't one actually really typically meant to use an art palette, it's just a surface. So first thing I'm doing is I am waxing the back of it so that it is protected from the resin bits, and it's going to help me be able to take them off easier when I'm done my project. So I want to make sure that everything is nicely covered there. And once that's done, I'm using some paint pyramids to hold my pieces up off of the surface so that the resin can drip off. So this time is the first time I am trying to use alcohol ink to color my resin. So I have this monsoon colored alcohol ink. I'm also using some mica powder in the sand part. I don't really want to have the texture of sand, but I did use, it's an heirloom gold mica powder to just give it a little bit of color. So I'm doing the sand part first, just adding my layer there, making sure that everything is completely covered, using my fingers to spread it all around and make sure that it's also going down over the sides. I want to make sure there's no open pieces there. And then I'm going to use the blue that I created for the beach. Now the thing with alcohol inks as opposed to mica powders is because it's translucent, this water is going to just be a little bit more translucent. And I wanted it just to try it out with the alcohol inks. So again, I'm making sure to spread everything out, making sure it's all covered, including the sides. I want to make sure that it all flows over the sides evenly, and the best way to do that is to make sure that the side is covered with some resin. So now I'm doing my clear row, my clear line right on the side of the colored resin. And I realized that I had too wide of a space there, so I'm just narrowing that down a little bit. So then I'm going to add my white line. And for this one I'm using, I didn't have white there, I have my gold. For the white for this one I'm using my Mix-All white. I'm going to take the heat gun and get rid of all of the bubbles that have risen to the surface. So I just have it on a low setting, so I'm not really moving the resin at all, I'm just getting all the heat bubbles popped. Now I'm going to do my white layer. And because the water is clear here, I decided to do some white lines throughout it, because as I keep adding layers, you're going to be able to see those lower layers, and it's just going to add a little bit of depth. So I'm going to blow the white pieces or white lines out from the farthest from the beach line to the closest. And I don't have to do a lot of blowing on this because it is going to keep moving as the resin dries. I just don't want a straight line on there or a heavy line underneath there. So now I'm going to add my shells, my sand dollars, starfish, little decorations to the shoreline. And I always do this when the resin is wet because then it can really stick to the resin and adhere to it. There's really not a rhyme or reason to it. I usually have one sand dollar and then a starfish or two, and then just add a couple other layers or a couple other seashells. You kind of want to make it look as natural as possible, so you don't want everything spread out evenly and unnatural. So this is day 2. My first layer has completely cured. I'm going to add my first wave layer. So I'm just pouring out the different containers for the different colors. I'm going to do one that is my Mix-All white for the waves. And then I'm going to leave one clear, and then I'm going to do one, the blue with the alcohol ink. So when you're adding color pigment to your resin, you want to make sure that you don't add more than 10% of what the resin is. If you add too much to it, the resin's not going to cure. So you need to make sure that whatever you have for resin there, there's not more than 10% of your color. And it's really quite easy to not get to that point. I've never gotten close, so With the alcohol inks, I'm only adding a few drops. And then I think sometimes I add a little bit more if it's not quite as dark blue as I want it. I don't want it to be completely opaque. I want it to still have some transparency to it. And again, just make sure that you don't go over 10% of the amount with whatever you're coloring it with. Make sure it's mixed really, really well. And then you can start pouring. So I'm going to go just a little bit shy of where my first layer had the white edge. So again, putting it on the second piece. Then I'm going to use my hand to spread it all evenly out, making sure that everything is covered. Again, including the sides. I want to make sure that I have the resin flowing evenly over the sides. I'm doing that for the second piece. And then you notice I always have gloves when I'm doing this. You never ever want to do this with a bare hand. First of all, it would be next to impossible to clean the resin off your hands, but in its fluid state, resin's actually toxic, so you don't want to be touching it with your bare hands. Now I'm putting my clear layer on, and then my white layer. And again, I'm adding the white lines throughout the water just to add a little bit more depth with the layers. Got the heat gun on a low setting, just removing all of the bubbles that have risen to the surface. And once that's all done, we put the fine tip on. I'm doing it on a higher setting and just blowing that white out a little bit. And then the edge of my wave. And when I'm doing the edge of my wave, I'm holding the heat gun as horizontal as possible to my piece so that it flows out over the top of the blue. And then I'm going to leave it to cure. Actually, this time I used the blowtorch to torch it. Only needs to be lightly done for a couple seconds. So I decided that I saw a little bit too much of the brown beneath my blue, so I'm adding just a little bit of a blue mica powder just to make it a little bit more opaque. I didn't add a lot. I don't want it to be completely opaque, but I just wanted it to be a little bit less see-through than what was happening. So I've got that all mixed in. I'm going to pour that out, going back a little bit from that first layer. And then use your hand to spread everything out. You could use one of the silicone stir sticks or whatever to spread it out. I just find it much easier with my fingers because you can actually feel where the resin isn't covering things. I just find it much easier. And I tend to end up touching it anyway, so I might as well touch it right from the start. And then if you don't like exactly the way the edge is looking, use your finger to change that. Now I'm doing my clear layer. And then I'm doing my white line. And again, I'm going to keep on doing the one on little lines throughout it. So pop all the bubbles on the top with a low setting. And then narrow tip, high setting, and blow the white out. And same with the second one. And you may be able to see a little bit the layers below it. You can see some of the white that's below it, and it just adds a little bit of depth to it. Now I'm going to use the baker's torch to just torch it. That just helps the cells pop a little bit with the white, and then let it cure. And now I'm on my third and final wave for the mixture on the side. And this one as well, I used a little bit of the mica powder just to make it slightly opaque. And again, it's not completely opaque. There's still some transparency to it, but I just wanted to make sure that it was going to end up blue and not see too much of the brown from the surface. Use your hand to spread it all out, including over the sides. And then I had a little bit of extra of the resin, so I might as well put it on the piece. Spread it around a little bit. Because the mica gives it a little bit of, you can see it in there, I just wanted to make sure that the ridges were kind of flowing with my waves. So you'll see me move it a little bit that way. Now adding the clear layer along the edge. And then the final white layer. Now the heat gun to take all the bubbles, to pop all the bubbles. And then we're going to blow that white out. So now I've got the fine tip and I'm doing it on a higher setting. And then we're going to do that with a second piece. Just blow those little white bits out a little bit. And then completely blow the water edge out. And then use the baker's torch just to torch the surface lightly. And then we'll let it cure. So now we've got our fully cured resin piece. We're going to take those resin drips off of the back of it. And this is one of my favorite parts. So we're just using the heat gun to lightly heat up the resin. We don't want it completely hot, but we do want to heat it up a little bit. And when it's a little bit warm, that razor knife just goes through it like butter. So it makes it quite easy to make a nice clean edge along the bottom. And this is where putting that wax layer on at the beginning really helps, because the wax will let it just release a little bit easier. And then you're not accidentally gouging into the wood because you have to use extra force. You have to use barely any force with this, which is really quite nice. And because they come off so easily, it's really quite satisfying to do. You'll find at the beginning that it's a little bit harder to heat up the resin just because the heat gun is cool, but once the heat gun is warm, the resin will heat up so much more quickly. So I got the first one done, now I'm working on the second one. And you want to make sure that you've got those little bits that are coming off, put them out of the way so that you're not accidentally sticking them to the front of your piece. Because while your piece is cured, if you accidentally put something on the front and then press on it, it can put a little indent in there. We want to leave that off of there. So now we're doing the final edge. And now we've got a nice clean back for our piece. It's perfect. So I just wanted to show, these are the painter's pyramids. The resin pops right off of there. So you'll notice while I'm working that it does flow around it, but they pop right off of there, so you don't have to worry about not being able to use them over and over again. They just pop right off. So that's all I have for you today. Don't forget to hit subscribe to see more videos like this.